Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another episode of Buha's Block. On today's show, I'm thrilled to be joined by Iztok Franko of the Diggin' Basketball Substack. Iztok, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing great. Enjoying the finals and in anticipation of the offseason and free agency start.
What have you thought of the finals so far? I know it's been a lot of talk about ratings and lack of a true superstar, and I think it's been a great series so far. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I love it. I think two teams with clear identity. They've been playing awesome basketball whole playoffs, and I think the competitiveness, the speed of the game, the aggressiveness, I think it's amazing to watch to how hard these two teams play and go at, and all. Most of the games have been very competitive, so it's good. For me personally, it's been awesome finals.
So for today's show, I wanted to talk to you about Luka. All things Luka. I think that this is a big offseason for Luka and the Lakers. He's extension eligible on August 2nd, and they're going to have about a month to build out the potential roster for next season before his extension. But he's going to be playing in Eurobasket with Slovenia, and the Lakers are going to have to make some big decisions with the roster in terms of draft capital and free agency and just the different ways they want to go about building next season's group. So I want to start with this. What do you feel like you learned over the past or the final couple months of the season? What do you feel like you learned about Luka as a Laker, and then also in a broader context, just this Lakers group and how he fits into it and how maybe they could better fit things around him?
Yeah, I think everything that happened since the trade, since February, it was so, let's say, so emotional, so surprising, also emotion full. I think Luka talked about after the last game when they lost it was like he's still not processed everything, and I think it was like first, I think the surprise, the move that happened, I think it hit him literally hard. I think a lot of people talked about it. Also, people that are close to him that I talked to, is plenty to me said, look, I think this has been even harder than it looks from the outside on him personally. So I think it was that. Then the excitement of playing with LeBron, playing in LA. I think even here in Slovenia, I think everybody was excited because the Lakers are such a well-known brand here. And I think also for him, I think it was something new, something exciting. He obviously, LeBron, his idol, so playing with him, I think that part was great. And I think after him coming back from the injury, and then they went on that winning streak, finished number 3rd, which was the highest that he finished the season, basically. Never with the Mavericks. I think the highest was the 4th seed. So coming into the playoffs, but then in the playoffs, I think kind of the reality hit a little bit, that this team, realistically, playoffs expose some of the flaws, roster-wise, fit-wise. That is, if you look compared to his last situation in Dallas, last 2 seasons, last 2 teams, I think that teams was much more well-rounded and built around his skill set. So I think that was the main takeaway of the playoffs. And now I think, like you said, very important summer for him. I think he was probably under most scrutiny in his career after the trade. And I think also for the Lakers, there is a lot of pressure, I think, to try to rethink, to recalibrate. Pelinka said it was like rearranging the plane in the air. Now they have it on the ground. So I think let's see what they can do in the hangar.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting, like, they've tended to wait until the trade deadline or closer to the trade deadline to make moves. And I think this summer is a bit of a fork in the road for them, where it's like, okay, I mean, if you want to present Luka with the same roster and say, hey, you want a sided extension, we'll make a deal in season. I don't know if that's going to go over so well. Although I do think, just to spoil the end of the show, I think he is going to be signing an extension. But I wanted to go through some of the guys and just individually how each of them fits with Luka as we build toward what next year's roster could look like. I'm going to put LeBron to the side just because I don't think we need to dissect the LeBron Luka fit. I mean, I think it could certainly be better. I personally would like to see more two-man game between those two. It's something I asked JJ about during the season, and he was not very receptive to it when I asked him about it. But I would like to see more direct two-man game. I think there are situations where it doesn't make as much sense. Like if you're playing the Magic and you have Franz and Paolo guarding them, right? Okay, you're not really creating an advantage necessarily unless LeBron is maybe slipping and like you can find that kind of moment, that crack in the defense. But there are times where I look at like Indiana where they had Nembhard on Luka and Pascal Siakam on LeBron, and it's like that's a more natural advantage creation where if LeBron could get Nembhard in the post, that's that they're going to either double or he's going to get a pretty good look or maybe get fouled. If Luka can get Pascal Siakam on him, he could dance with him and create that separation or potentially get by him. So I think that there were plenty of times they could have tried to target, often teams are putting bigs on LeBron, smaller point of attack guys on Luka. I think they could create more two-man game there. But putting LeBron aside, looking at Austin, Rui, Dorian, Gabe, Jackson, Vando, I think those are the primary guys that, I think four of them could be on next year's roster potentially. So just looking at the fit here, let's start with Austin. Looking at databaller.com, the two-man combo with Luka and Austin across the regular season and playoffs was a plus 5.7 net rating. So solid, not like elite, not great, but that's solid to good. What did you make of the fit between Luka and Austin? I think this is a big one for the fan base right now with how they build this out. Like, how do you think Luka and Austin fit together?
I think chemistry-wise, fit-wise, respect-wise, Luka talked about Austin a lot of time in very good terms. I think offensively, the fit is... We've seen a lot of this kind of fit in the past on Luka teams. It started with Luka with Jalen Brunson. Then Ian Spencer Dinwiddie at his first Mavericks stint was a similar self-creating guard. Then with Kyrie. So I think the player that can create, that can hit the spot-up shot offensively, it's like a perfect fit. Jalen Brunson had that skill. Kyrie had the skill to shift between roles on-off ball. And I think Austin did similar things that Kyrie and Jalen Brunson did in the past. What I think personally, and I tweeted that in the several times in the past, I think what I haven't seen with Luka and if you go back to the finals, now let's see Shai Gilgeous-Alexander with Dort, with Caruso, with Wallace, or if you look at Tyrese Halliburton with Andrew Nembhard, I would like to see maybe Luka paired with, let's say, really defensive-minded ball pressure guard, because I think that was one of the big problems of the Lakers in the playoffs was they just didn't press the ball enough. So they didn't have the players who are aggressive, who would get in your face, who would fight over screens. So that's why JJ probably opted for very switch conservatives, let's say shrink scheme. And we see in the finals how aggressive these teams are. So that is one of the things that I think strategically the Lakers will have to decide. Personally, as I said, offensively, I love the fit, but I think defensively, I would really love to see. I was back in Dallas, I was not pushing, but always dreamed about, Luka paired with a guy like Drew Holiday in his peak. I think that would be an optimal fit at the guard spot for him. Now, these guys are hard to find, so I think if probably Lakers, if they cannot find a player of such caliber, they will have to make it work with Austin, but that makes, I think, everything else around these two, I think, a little bit more complicated defensively.
That was going to be my follow-up. So do you think it can work defensively because I've been looking at next season's theoretical starting lineup, and they've talked about Austin as a pillar. I think based on his contract situation, his value to the team, his value to the organization, the fan base, all that stuff, I think he's likely going to be a Laker next season. And if they were to explore anything, it would potentially be at the earliest at the trade deadline, but most likely I think they're going to try to re-sign him. And then longer term, if it doesn't fit, that's where you could look to potentially trade him. But so if we have that operating assumption of you're trying to build a roster a starting group, a rotation around Luka, LeBron, and Austin as a trio. You have LeBron, Luka, and Austin as 3 starters. And now they're looking for this center, which is the elusive rim running, lob threat, rim protector, versatile defender. Okay, so let's just say it's center X is the center. If they can nail that 5th spot and find a wing defender who has a certain amount of athleticism, toughness, physicality, can defend multiple positions, basically can defend the best 1 through 3 player on a nightly basis, do you think that is enough with the right center to support those 3? Or do you think it's just that there's still going to be a limitation there and it has to at some point be like longer term kind of swapping out the LeBron piece or the Austin piece, and to your point, kind of having more of that defensive, probably having multiple defensive guys like that, like we see with OKC, Boston, etc.
Yeah, I think it makes it a little bit or much more complicated. So I think if you have those 3, I think the remaining 2 slots, you have to have speed, athleticism, you have to have length. So it makes what you need in those 2 positions much more, I would say, defined. So then we will talk about a guy like Rui. Definitely doesn't fit that picture if you ask me, because again, he has a certain skill set. He is a okay athlete, but he's not exceptional. He's not exceptional defender. He's not an uber aggressive defender. So he's not a ball pressure guy. Again, center. Okay, we will talk about some options I think later on, but it's again, it's much more complex. I think again, going back to the Mavericks, I wrote like a 3,000-word deep dive on all defensive teams of the past, what worked with Luka and what not. So if you look at the finals iteration, you had Derek Jones Jr., who assumed that on-ball pressure athlete, really fast, the lob threat at the wing spot, a guy, and then you had Derek Lively. So you had these 2 guys and PJ Washington, which was the 3rd guy, and then they kind of incorporated Kyrie and Luka around that. So they covered a lot and they brought that needed speed, athleticism, and size. So I think it's like I said, it's not ideal defensively, definitely. Also in terms of aggression, in terms of speed of the game, that I think this is something that I also did a deep dive. You can see how faster the game is becoming every season. So I think this is something that I think the Lakers will need to have in mind when they strategically think about the key pillars of their team.
You mentioned Rui, so I think let's just talk about Rui. So I filtered this by regular season and playoffs, because you could argue the playoffs are, of course, more important, but I wanted to kind of just have a larger sample size here with Luka and each of these players. So among the core rotation guys, Rui was the final player who had a positive net rating, 3rd worst among the rotation guys, still a +5 net rating with Luka and Rui. I think this is the pivot point of the Lakers offseason, is just what they end up doing with Rui. I think you could argue his contract is fair, and if he's like your 6th man, top, I think looking at a lot of the contenders, he would be like the 6th or 7th best player on their team. Lakers, he's arguably their 4th best player. And so I think there's a slotting issue there. But to your point, if you are starting with Luka, LeBron, and Austin as your trio, and you have a center as the 5th guy, that other guy has to be more athletic, better defensively, quicker. And I just like Rui's more of a power forward. So with the Luka Rui fit, I think offensively it fits pretty well. Rui's a good catch and shoot guy, good spot up shooter, has gotten better at attacking closeouts, has become a good cutter. So I think offensively it's kind of similar to Austin, where you could talk me into Luka's so great and so special offensively that if you could shoot and you have some skill offensively, you're going to fit in. But I think for me, it just comes like the defensive end. Again, if you're looking at it from like a Luka Rui prism, now that you have to have certain guys out there to complement those 2 defensively. So what do you think of the Luka Rui fit, and kind of zooming out, like what the Lakers should potentially do with Rui and his $18 million expiring?
Yeah, I think, like you said, he's a great shooter. I think in the playoffs, he all of a sudden, because they played small all the time, he all of a sudden became the main pick and roll partner for Luka. And these pick and pops, he was good because he can shoot it. But I think here, even if he stays, I think there is some potential for internal improvement because the chemistry will be better. He will know how to play off Luka, how to play in pick and roll, when to pop, when to short roll, things like that. But like we said, I think his main skills defensively are very similar to Luka's. He's strong. He can switch on the bigger guys, and he can hold his own against. I don't know. We saw it when they played that great games against Denver. He was affronting Jokic, fighting, wrestling with Jokic, and this is something that is basically Luka's skill. So I think there's duplication of that, and the Lakers, like I said, I think they need defenders that can make defensive that can play make defensively. One thing also, I think last week I posted on my Substack, it was like a deep dive. In Luka's 7 years, he hasn't played with a player who made an all defense team. So not even not making all defense team, but not getting more than 3 or 4 votes, which are basically homer votes. I think Derek Lively and Derek Jones Jr. were close to that, and they would get some if the Mavericks would be better last season. But I think the Lakers need to find a defensive game changer playmaker. Now, is it going to be the wing? Is it going to be a guard? Is it going to be a big? I think they need to find it. But like you mentioned, if you have 3 spots already filled, and then there is basically 2 spots left, I think this is where they will have to do it short term if they don't do some bigger changes with Austin, or they find, I don't know, a bigger trade that involves Austin.
What about Dorian? I think like we saw the movie before in Dallas, right?
Yeah.
But I think he's at a different point of his career. He's a little bit older. He's transitioned more toward. He's more like a 4.5, I would argue, defensively. Where I thought like he unlocked the Lakers' small ball looks earlier in the season. If you look at before the Dorian trade. Their small ball looks were not effective with Rui and LeBron just at the 4 and the 5. And he came in and I think he changed the culture defensively. He was a big part of the locker room. And then we know about his relationship with Luka. So the Lakers have a decision to make with him as well. Well, he first has the player option, but then he could opt in and extend. He could opt out and re-sign. So he's got some power there in terms of what he wants to do. But plus 11.6 with Luka and Dorian on the floor together in the regular season and playoffs, second best mark on the team behind just Dalton at plus 12.4, which that one kind of surprised me. They're almost 10 points per 100 possessions better defensively with Luka. That one I'm like, I just refuse to believe that.
The lineup data was crazy.
Yeah, that's that one. I don't fully buy, but with Dorian and Luka on together, plus 8.1 on the offensive end, minus 3.5 on the defensive end. So notably better on both sides of the ball. What did you make of their 2-man chemistry? We saw. I looked this up late in the season, but Dorian shot much better when Luka was the primary passer. Majority of his makes post Luka trade were coming from Luka. So we see the 2-man chemistry with those two. We know about the friendship, the relationship, but how did you see that evolve or just continue from their time in Dallas?
I think, like you said, just continued because Luka and Dorian, he's the guy he played most minutes with in his career. He defended most possessions with him, most screens. And you can see it, Luka trusting 100%. They shoot all the time on the shoot around. They compete. They're friends, basically. So I think I would be surprised if Dorian is not re-signed. Now, re-signed for what kind of role, what kind of value? I think that is the big question. Because even in Dallas, a lot of the time people were complaining he was overtaxed with being like this primary best defender of the team. Even in his prime, Dorian is a good defender, very solid defender. He's a hard worker, but if I go back to my point, he's not this 100 or 90 percentile athlete. So and now, especially, I think as he goes past 30, I think you can see a little bit slippage there. So I think ideally you have it coming off the bench like he was. And I think that is a good option to have a wing that can shoot the three. But I think relying on him so heavily as they were in the playoffs, I think that is something that they should try to avoid next season.
Do you think he's better as like a seventh man? Is that because he was functionally their sixth man, but really their fifth guy because they're playing that smaller lineup for so long, and then eventually replace Jackson with him in the starting group. So I guess technically their fifth guy. Do you think a seventh man slotting is probably more appropriate? And then how much do you think? I've been thinking like something like 3 years, 36 million, 4 years, 48 million, somewhere in that like 12-ish million where he gets the years of the 3 or the 4, but then it's a little bit less than he's currently making. I mean, you could argue he's worth more than that, but yeah.
I think if you look, Dallas has a similar situation last year with Derek Jones Jr., who then went to the Clippers, and I think they signed Najee Marshall for much lower value. I think it was something around 9-10 million, So we'll see. I think the Lakers really need to be smart on the margins, I think, here. And I think probably it bodes well for them that I think Dorian wants to stay and Luka, I guess, or I'm sure wants him to stay. So I think, like I said, probably maybe they go on the years and they maybe find some flexibility to fill some other spots.
You mentioned a tough physical point of attack type defender. Gabe Vincent had the third best net rating with Luka among the rotation guys, plus 9.7. And I think on paper, he fits that to an extent. I think you'd like to see more consistency with him on the offensive end. I also think there's some defensive limitations just because of his size, where we saw sometimes teams would target him and guys could just rise up over him or post him up. But when we also talk about the Lakers offseason and their options, Gabe is one of the guys who would likely be outgoing just because of that $11 million expiring salary. So I see I think the fit is there between Gabe and Luka. I just don't know if it's quite there enough to justify not trading him. So if we're talking about guys who like Rui, I think there's some more concerns, especially with the defensive end. Maxi Kleber, we just don't know what stage of his career he's going to be at next season, but he does have the relationship with Luka. But a guy like Gabe, I kind of view him in the middle a little bit, where I see the basketball fit. I just don't know if he's quite good enough for the role the Lakers had him in, for the contract that he has. But Gabe's an interesting one for me because if you told me the Lakers really like the fit and wanted to keep him because of that, because he is that guy who can take point of attack off the bench. He's been in a solid shooter, average shooter, but like he can hit flurries of threes. He's streaky. What do you think of the Luka and Gabe fit?
I think here it comes a little bit back to more strategically what JJ will want to do, because what I like during the season, what he did is basically he not promoted, but let's say he prioritized guys that really pressured the ball and hustle off the bench. So you have Gabe, you have Goodwin, you had Wendell, and I think the Lakers did a lot of that during the season. I was surprised basically, or let's say there was a lot of games where Gabe was hustling, he was pressuring full court, denying screen. I remember a game, I think it was against the Knicks, he was really fighting over screens like Nembhard is doing now in the finals against Jalen Brunson, denying the ball. And then Goodwin and, like I said, Vanderbilt, they both fit that. So to me, it was very surprising, because they were doing that the whole season, that they went completely off that strategy in the playoffs. Basically, those guys, they build their minutes, their rotation, their skill set, but they didn't play these three guys, basically. So to me, that's going to be interesting. I see these three guys kind of a package, because if JJ wants to continue playing this more aggressive style, in-your-face style, he said that, I think in one interview, he said that he found like a superpower in the NBA, which is like playing hard all the time. And these three guys, I think, are that. So we'll see. Obviously, he is not the elite on-ball defender that some of the guys, the better guys in the league are. But off the bench, if you have a guy, he's a guy who can change the rhythm, who can provide that pressure, and he can shoot it occasionally, or when he had a good night, he can even swing you some games. So we'll see. I think if they will find a deal to package, I probably think they will use it. He's not a guy that is untouchable, but I think if he stays, I will be curious to see how JJ, if he goes again with those three guys and Dorian off the bench, like tone setters defensively, providing that pressure, that energy throughout the course of the regular season.
I think again, it's more of a slotting thing with Gabe for me, where I think he's better slotted as like an eighth man, where with the Lakers he was more of a seventh man, but really arguably a sixth man, again, based on Jackson being phased out of the rotation a bit. And I think he's more of at this point on a really good team, he's more of a fourth guard than a third guard. And for the Lakers, he was essentially a third guard. So I think if you can move him a little bit down the bench pecking order and get a better backcourt player ahead of him, and he's more complimenting that guy or complimenting Austin or Luka, because I also think he's a good fit with Austin, and that's something to factor in. But I like Gabe. I just think you would like to see a little bit more consistency, and then again, just some size limitations that I don't think his offense can offset enough. You mentioned Vando. What do you make of the Vando fit? And of note, he was the rotation player with the worst net rating with Luka, minus 5.1. They were 2.3 points per 100 possessions worse on the offensive end together, which makes some sense, but also 2.8 points per 100 possessions worse defensively. The offensive end, I think, is relatively self-explanatory just because of Vando's shooting limitations, and I would say catching limitations and finishing limitations, and just a relatively limited play. Like, I like the ball handling and playmaking when he's able to in the short roll or around the elbows, but in terms of actually scoring, that there are some real limitations there. And then defensively, I was surprised by that, because you would think like Vando is arguably their best defender or in that conversation. So I was a little bit surprised by that. But what do you make of the fit between Luka and Vando?
I don't know. In the past, Vando was the guy that I always, from afar, kind of really loved to watch play. He always plays hard, crashes defensive glass, which the Lakers don't do a lot. So, but I think this year, I don't know if it was kind of injuries or still recovering. He talked about not having an off season. I think athletically, he kind of was lacking, I don't know, that extra 10% or the last 10% of athleticism, which for a guy like him who relies on that, like you said, finishing, I think often he would catch the ball under the hoop and didn't dunk and then struggle to finish, or making like these defensive playmaking plays. So to me, he's probably the hardest guy to move because he has a long-term contract and he basically has to prove that he's worth that contract. So either he has a year that he takes a step, we'll see athletically if he can improve. Also, we saw chemistry with Luka. He would get like tons of great corner looks. If he can't get used to that, if he can make a little bit more, which is a big if. But I think, again, going back to the Goodwin, Vincent trio, I think if he stays, I would expect JJ to get back to what he was trying to establish last season. But I hope that they find a model to make it also translate to the playoffs in terms of playing hard, playing shorter stints. I think this is what you can watch in these playoffs. For example, what Carlisle is doing with, I don't know, guys like Obi Toppin, Ben Shepherd, guys like that. I think you can not say that, I don't know, Gabe Vincent is like 3 levels beyond those guys, and they're playing occasional playoff minutes. So I think if they have them in their rotation, they need to figure out through the regular season how to get, I don't know, 5-10 minutes per game from thus in the playoffs, not play all these guys 40 plus minutes.
I like that. Final one before we get into the offseason is Jaxson Hayes and what to make of his fit. Lakers were plus 8.8 points per 100 possessions with Luka and Jackson. There were times where Jackson looked like a starting caliber center. I would argue that he had like that 6-week stretch where defensively they were really good with him on the floor as the backline defender. And he had the half against New Orleans where he went like 7 for 7, 8 for 8. Luka likes having a lob threat. Jackson is in that 95th percentile of big men in terms of finishing and jumping and his catch radius. So we saw in the playoffs, it was rough to say the least. He was gradually phased out of the series, lost his starting spot, and I think cost himself some money with how where he was at, probably like late February, early March. So with Jaxson, I think in a backup role he can make some sense, but you also probably have to mend some fences between the sides. And I think he's a guy that wanted more than a minimum contract. I don't know if he's going to be able to get that now. So with Jaxson and Luka, they also share the same agent. They went to dinner the first night that Luka got there. So there's also some camaraderie behind the scenes there. But with Luka and Jaxson, is Jaxson good enough, I guess, to be a backup and give you just enough of what Luka needs moving forward?
I would really say it depends on who the primary big is. If your primary big is another role threat who is playing 20 minutes per game, then Jaxson is not good enough, or he doesn't have the skill set to complement that. If you have, I don't know, a very good big who is like completely different archetype and can play and stay on the floor in the playoffs like 30 minutes per game, then Jaxson is good enough, and he brings this other, like you said, rim rolling big skill set that Luka really likes. I have my own theory, and we can discuss afterwards about that skill set. But basically, watching Luka in Dallas, you could see that any center that can catch lob threats will have great lineup data with Luka, because he will throw great lobs, and they typically attack drop coverage. But then when coaches or teams would change scheme, teams would sub them out, and then basically the lineup data would stay good. So Luka had great lineup data with Dwight Powell, with Willie Cauley-Stein, and I think Willie Cauley-Stein is like a good comp to Jaxson Hayes, the level he was. He was always on the fringes of being an NBA player, and he had athleticism, but decision making was always not good enough to stick for a bigger role in the NBA. I think a lot of talk is about Daniel Gafford, for example. To me, Daniel Gafford is a similar archetype that we saw. It's a better player than Jaxson Hayes, but we saw even with Dallas in the playoffs that type of a center has a limited usage, very limited usage, which is very scheme dependent in the playoffs. If you cannot punish the switch, if you cannot punish teams on defensive glass, and you have issues on defensively with physicality, with rebounding, defensive rebounding, which both Jaxson and also Daniel Gafford had, I think then you had to have an alternative plan.
Let's just get into it then. Let's get into the offseason. What do you think the Lakers need this summer to maximize Luka? So we've talked about the elusive center, that they're clearly going to need a new starting center, and they're going to need a new defensive guard and or wing. But is there a specific player archetype other than that defensive point of attack guy that you were talking about? And what you just said raised my antenna a little bit of talking about Jaxson and talking about Daniel Gafford. Do you think there's a better center archetype for Luka than the rim running lob threat, and maybe him just having to adjust to a different type of center?
Yeah, I think going back, what Lakers need, like I mentioned, I think they need athleticism, they need speed, they need length, and this is the template that worked, and I think works best with Luka. So, but high level, big picture, if you have a magic wand, I think what they need eventually is a second star that is a great fit with Luka. We talked about that. And this is something that, but I don't think they will find, probably, or maybe we'll be surprised, but probably it's not realistically to expect.
You never know with the Lakers.
You never know, yeah. Why will much crazier things happen? So let's say that's an optimal. The second type would be, to me, like all defense type of an athlete, I don't know, wing or a center. Again, very difficult with current resources. So I think realistically, what I would be happy with for this summer is that they fit a starter, a piece that fits that criteria in the starting lineup. So it could be a wing, it could be a center. For a center, but just to me, somebody that's like clear-cut future piece, a starter. Could be a fifth starter, we talked about, or the fourth starter. Somebody that you say, okay, this is one piece that we added, and then we will add on top of that going forward. As we are talking about centers, rim rolling archetype, this is what Luka wants. This is what works in the regular season. This is what he has fun with. And I get it, because it unlocks the lobs, the assist. It's a fun style of play, and I think in the regular season you need to have a big like that on your roster. But I think watching past playoffs, to me, like you said, is there another archetype? I think a center, again, not a realistic target, and it will probably bring some pain to the Laker fans. Is like a guy like Ivica Zubac, So a big who can defend, who can post, who can punish the switch, because that's the biggest problem. It was in the playoffs with the Lakers, with Dallas in the finals. Basically, every team depended the bigs with the wing, because neither Derek Lively, Gafford, they couldn't punish the switch, nor they could be dominant on the offensive guys. So, guy like Ivica Zubac, he can play make even on the short roll. He can make the floater. He can punish. He can score. He's much more versatile. And I think Luka, we saw this in the past. Luka is so good that he will figure out how to feed that big even he's not jumping at the rim. He will find a different kind of assist. Like I said, Ivica Zubac is not a realistic target, but maybe there is a guy or there is a player, somebody like that. Even we see with OKC a player like Isaiah Hartenstein, who is a great screener, who is a great short roll guy, who is a great passer, decision maker. I think that kind of a player, a good big, eventually would be a better fit, my opinion. But based on the history, Luka wanted Gafford in Dallas. Luka, probably they pushed for Mark Williams straight, not Luka, but I think that was the archetype. So I think they will have to find a guy like that. But I don't know, if you get a guy like Clint Capella who can provide that on a, let's say, a veteran exception, or let's say with the resources that they have, maybe eventually they can find a different type of a big. Or we were talking about the names like Claxton, who defensively I think has the potential to be very good, who can be the big difference maker in terms of athleticism, size, switchability. I think defensively that's very important, that you can switch. This is what basically we saw with Derek Lively and Luka.
I mean, who would fit very well with Luka and Austin and LeBron, Ivica Zubac and Alex Caruso. Those two guys would fit. Those are the exact two players they need in their starting lineup. Really, yeah. I mean, it's just wild. But I know I just triggered millions of Laker fans right now. But so you brought up Claxton, and he's been the guy that I've looked at every depth chart. I've looked at every cap sheet, and I've tried to go through the realistic players that I think could be available. Mm-hmm. I think Claxton's the best among the realistic options. I don't see a Walker Kessler being available for what the Lakers have. I think everyone has a price. I think the price for a guy like Kessler is very high. With a guy like Claxton, you mentioned the switchability, the versatility. I think people look at the frame and they look at the weight, and they have some misconceptions about the type of player that he is. I think he's tougher and more physical and can hold up better against some of those elite bigs than people kind of stereotype him with. But in terms of the offensive end, he is a good finisher. He is a good rim runner, lob threat. Some of the shot selection, like he's tried to expand his range. I don't love that. But with a guy like Claxton, what do you think of that potential fit, and what would you be willing to give up if you're the Lakers? I think you could do something theoretically like Gabe, Maxi Kleba, Dalton, or Shake, and a first. Maybe Dalton and a first is too much, so you got to pick between those two. But like, what do you think of that potential framework of a deal and Claxton's fit with Luka?
I think, like you said, I think the Lakers or Pelinka will have to take some sort of a gamble of a guy who had like a off year on a bad team, like Claxton, and hope in a competitive environment he can step up. So with Claxton, to me, like I said, I think he has like close to all defense potential if he plays. I think Luka in the past, I saw games when he was switching. He said, look, I think on the first JJ podcast, he was one of the better defenders individually on switch against him. So he's very switchable. He can do a lot of stuff. And I think, like you said, even if he's not the biggest, if you go back to the Minnesota series, they had the bulk with LeBron, with Luka. They had the, let's say, the strength. But I think where they struggled is then was they just lacked the length. So Rui didn't have to compete with Gobert, I think, and I think rebounding wise, I think Claxton would help. He has that size, additional size that would help. Defensively, like we said, if he can switch, that's it. Offensively, I'm a little bit more skeptic because, like I said, being just the role big, it's like a very limited skill, and he didn't show. I think in Brooklyn they had some problems. The new coach Fernandez, they wanted to play more this DHO based offense, and they had some questions about his decision making. So I think that's why we saw him being a little bit reducing his role. So that's one, but I think that is a gamble as such with the asset. Maybe it's a big gamble if you are using your only first round pick, but this is probably something that they will need to consider. The other, when I was talking before about the Ivica Zubac archetype, maybe a lower gamble in terms of assets. Probably not. You're not using your first round pick, but you need to fill the salary. Is take even bigger gamble on a guy like DeAndre Ayton in the last year of the contract. So he's a guy more closer to the archetype that I said before, who has more an offensive game, who you can give the ball in the post. He's not. He's very mid-range, let's say, jump shot dependent. But we saw him, for example, in the finals with Phoenix when he was defending Jokic well in certain matchups. He was defending well if motivated. With him, it's always, with a guy like that.
You said the key word there.
Yeah. That's why I said. But maybe, as I said, it's not the asset. But I'm saying this is the different type of archetype that I see offensively. Yeah. Probably would be better because it's much more punishing towards the switches, and I think it would give Luka in pick and roll, although he's not the most athletic rim roll guy, but he's a short roll guy, so he would give him much more options and flexibility. So we'll see. You mentioned also Walker Kessler. I think he, in terms of rim protection, he's a great fit, but I don't know defensively if he's as mobile, for example, as a guy like Paxson. He's not as active in drop or not as disrupting on switches. So again, I'm not sure about that fit and the price. So I think it will be an interesting summer. I think an upgrade they need. The threshold is very low, what they had this year. So, but going back to my initial point, I think I wouldn't say center is to me, I wouldn't be disappointed if they get a stopgap center, like we said. I know somebody like Capella and somebody else. If they get a clear upgrade at the other spot, at the wing spot or the guard spot or something like that.
So I'm gonna spoil my. I got a mailbag coming out, but one of the questions was potential wings and guards that they could trade for. So I went through again depth charts, cap sheets, trying to see guys that could theoretically be available, either due to them about to be hitting restricted free agency or teams being in situations where they might have to make some tough financial decisions. So this is a list that's all over the place in terms of size, defensive versatility, position, all that stuff. But in general, these are guards and wings that I think could be available this offseason. Drew Holiday, Andrew Wiggins, Michael Porter Jr., Keegan Murray, Benedict Mathurin, and I think that's partly based on what happens with Indiana in the finals. I think if they win the championship, they're not going to be trading anyone from their core 7-8. Derek Jones Jr., Ochai Agbaji, Royce O'Neal, Matisse Thybulle, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. So that's a list of 10 guys that range from 6'4" to 6'9", 6'10". Some of those guys are good defensively. Some of them are not. Some of them trend more toward the offensive end. But of that list, I know you had mentioned Prime Drew. The Lakers can't get that guy. But how would you feel about maybe the current version of Drew? He does have a couple more years left on that contract.
I think that's
it's hard to salary match, but And it's Lakers Boston. I don't know if that's going to be how those negotiations would go. But Wiggins is a guy that's come up. I think you could argue is maybe the best two-way wing that's going to be available to them. So Holiday, Wiggins, and even maybe a little bit lower. Like, could you get a Derrick Jones Jr.? Maybe the Clippers have to make some financial decisions. He's a guy who's, just because he's got multiple years left, is someone who's expendable to them. What do you make of some of those names?
What do you think of a guy like Herb Jones? You think it's not attainable in a trade?
Probably not. I don't know if you saw their reported asking price for Trey Murphy, and I know Trey Murphy is better and is going to be in more coveted for them. But they wanted like a good veteran, a good young player, and multiple picks. I just think with Herb, I think you probably have to give up Austin, and I think that's where the Lakers say no.
Yeah, no, I would.
But he would. He would be great. If you could slot him in, if there was a way to get him without giving up Austin, and it's Herb, Austin, and Luka. Like, I really like that trio together.
Yeah, no, that he would fit for me. For example, like this clear start or future piece. I don't know, asset-wise, how creative, or if you have them, but he's the guy that I would really, because he clearly has, or is, in my opinion, all defense potential. He has the potential to be disruptive defensively, but like you said, it's probably hard to get that. Wiggins is a guy similar to DeAndre Ayton, in my opinion, who has potential, but his, let's say, motivation, will, is something that is sometimes questionable. I was, before the trade, when the Mavericks were basically looking for that final piece that they lost last year with Derrick Jones Jr., we were looking for, let's say, what is the wing primary defender, and I said it's either Andrew Wiggins, or at that point it was Aaron Nesmith in Indiana, because he was coming back from the injury. He wasn't in the rotation. So these were the two guys I said I would look at. So Wiggins, I think, also going back, he was the guy who always defended Luka tough. He's like, he's the athlete, although he's now 30 plus. But so he is a guy, probably, if the price is not including the first round pick, it's just some combination of salary, that I would certainly try. I don't know. We'll see what is the price or what will happen with Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I think he has flashes. He had flashes also in these playoffs when he was from very bad to very good. His shooting is also very streaky. But like you said, I think they will need to find somebody who is either a very good athlete or who is a very good defender, or ideally both. But it's we'll see. I think Drew, when you ask me about him, his salary, you have to, and the years on that contract is what makes it rough. But in terms of veteran leadership, in terms of the skills, in terms of the fit, I would love that fit. But then again, it's you're starting probably him and Austin and Luka, and then LeBron at the 4, and then you have a big. So that's something that they will need to figure out. But we'll see. I think they'll probably, what I saw also from and you know this much better than me, that Rob the Pelinka, he's typically surprising with some moves, so maybe they take, like I said, a swing on a guy. I don't know, a guy like we'll see what happens with Kuminga extension with the new deal. He's, for example, like another guy who is an athlete, who can be a great defender, who is an elite athlete, and would fill all this skill set, but he has some question marks. But I think, for example, he's a guy who on offense, his fit is much worse in Golden State than it would be next to Seth Curry, when you have to have a high IQ, you have to move, you have to do all this read and rag, then playing off, let's say, a more on-ball heavy playmaker like Luka, who would find you in the, on lobs, in transition, and he would give you the ball to create on ball. So I think offensively, he would do much better, I think, around Luka than around Curry, and that doesn't mean that there are just different type of offensive players. So that, I think, it's something that we'll see. But I think, like I said, I think they need this athleticism and speed at different positions, and they will need to look probably at also some options that at the first sight might not look conventional or, let's say, be obvious.
While you were talking, I was playing with the trade machine a little bit, trying to figure out a Herb Jones trade. And
Yeah.
I mean, you can maybe do something along the lines of like Gabe, Dalton, a first, and they're probably going to want, another
Swaps,
swap or two or something. And like a couple swaps and the later swaps, because those are more valuable. I don't know. I mean, if you're New Orleans, like with the contract that he's on, I think he's got 14 next year and then 15 point something the year after. Like that's a really good value. So I don't see you'd probably have to be blown away with an offer, but it's, I mean, that's the guy that I think would check a lot of these boxes. I just don't know how real, like, the Lakers need more assets, and I don't know, maybe you could flip Rui for a first and then come back with a couple firsts and Dalton, and
do you think?
But that is also a lot to give up.
Do you think that Jaren Jackson Jr. signs the extension in Memphis? Because he's the name.
I do.
When we said elite complement, I think skill-wise he's a big who can punish the post, who can defend. Rebounding, okay, is an issue, but I think he's an elite defender. So I think looking at next summer, when basically everybody is off the books, and when he's basically, if he doesn't sign, he becomes unrestricted free agents. I think he's the name that, to me, I will be really curious to see if he signs now that they did these moves. If that means that they will give him a new big contract, or if he's a guy who say, okay, I want to play in a different market, not in Memphis anymore.
It's a good question. I feel like the way these things tend to go is the guy signs the extension
and then
ass out later, or depending on the direction of the team. I also think Memphis is in this weird spot now where because they've been indicating that now they want to keep Ja and Jaren Jackson, and you could argue that trading Bane and getting some more financial flexibility is going to allow them to give Triple J the big extension. And again, if they're coming offering with 50 plus million, like it's going to be hard for him to turn that down. At the same time, I'm like, you already were the 8 seed, and they were banged up, but they're always banged up. And that's just kind of been the story of Memphis for the past few years. But if you're trading your third best player, and I like KCP as a fringe starter, more likely as like a backup. I don't like that contract, but like he could be a useful playoff rotation player. But you're taking a clear step back, and that roster that was barely an 8th seed is now, maybe in a similar spot, but maybe even a bit lower in the West. Maybe you get lucky with health, and although Edey's already out, so it's like I'm just looking at like they can like. Actions speak louder than words, right? As cliche as it is. And looking at Memphis, that looks more like a soft rebuild or the start of a rebuild compared to a team that's like, we're reloading around our 2 guys when we didn't really reload with this trade. So I think it's honestly more of a Memphis question of like, do they want to trade these guys or keep them, or do they want to keep Triple J? If he's available, I think you have to make that call and figure that out. It is almost certainly going to cost you Austin. I don't see how that they would do that without.
He's
Austin
the guy I would trade Austin for.
But I think the ones I've seen fans talk about a lot is Triple J and Bam, and I think those are 2 guys that you would have to trade him for. But Bam's a totally different player archetype than.
And I don't think Miami is ever trading him. So. But I agree.
And the Lakers have some bad track records with Miami players too.
We'll see.
Are there any other targets you like in trades or free agency, or you think you?
No, like I was always fan, for example, of Marcus Smart. So he's a guy who is probably cost you some just salary fill. I think he's around 20 mil. And
21. You could do Gabe and Maxi.
Yeah. For example, if Washington wants to just, I don't know, do him a favor, not having on a roster award to split salaries in 2 for future deals. He's a guy that I think he's an upgrade over Gabe defensively for sure. Even with the step back, I always liked him off the bench. So probably he's a veteran. I think he's a guy who Luka likes also from the past interactions. So I don't know. These are probably moves on the fringes. I don't know if he's still the lead defender or he can be that. But I think it's if it really doesn't cost you, I think this is an upgrade where you can upgrade both in size and ball pressure and impact. I think he has injury concerns, of course, but he still had some good games. So as I said, I think you'll have to be creative in both looking at these bigger swings if they are if they are available, all taking on a gamble on these guys that are either on last year of their deals and just try to see maybe 1 year in a competitive environment in LA. Because what we saw in the past with Luka offensively, it's Derek James Jr. and Dante Exum are great examples. These guys were almost out of the league. Derek Jones Jr. became a starter on a finals team. He had his limitations, but offensively, Luka just unlocked him. Dante Exum again, he was like push the pace, pressure the ball. Um, Guys that roles can get simplified. That's why I mentioned Kuminga, for example, because he's an athlete. He's an athlete that would, I think, he's much better than Derek Jones Jr. or the same athlete type, but defensively could have a similar impact. So I think looking at guys like that, I don't know. Also, if you're looking about Austin deals, looking at teams that don't have playmaking, I don't know. Is it whether we talked about Utah with Kessler, or we are talking about Minnesota, Portland, I don't know, Brooklyn, some teams that are lacking. Orlando now is off the table. For example, on Portland, I don't know if you're talking about some deals. I think I really like Tumani Kamara. I think he's one of the best wing defenders, but they probably will not move him. I don't think so. I think he's their future pillar. Danny Avdia, again, he's the one like very solid starter that can be a really good connection piece. But I don't know really what Portland is doing, because I think I saw Simmons in a lot of trades scenarios. So I don't know if they are going for somebody like with this. They need somebody with primary ball handling skill set. So it's going to be very interesting summer.
I think the backdrop to this entire conversation is going to be Luka's extension and that looming over everything that the Lakers do. And I think we saw he gets traded to the Lakers immediately. He and Rob Pelinka have that conversation in Rob's office where Rob is asking, what type of players do you want to play with? What type of player archetypes? And he, of course, says the vertical lob threat big, and they go trade.
I saw him.
Williams, right?
I also saw him in the exit interview when they exited the restaurant with him and JJ. And I saw Luka with paper notes for the first time in his career. Yeah. I don't know.
They had the big the big paperwork.
I don't know if that was his short list or it was the JJ's long list of things to work in the summer. So.
They did their exit interview at Craig's, which I'll say is if you want to be photographed, that is one of the restaurants to go to. That is one of the most paparazzi friendly restaurants in LA. So they were clearly not doing that covertly. But how much pressure do you think Luka will apply directly or indirectly? How much pressure will there just be because it's going to be a month in? So at that point, there's always stuff that could happen in August or September. But normally, your roster going into the season is going to be the roster most close to August 2nd. So how much pressure do you think the Lakers will feel, should feel? And do you think Luka will exert? And now that he's in a new situation, they are trying to tailor it around him. And like he doesn't owe them the same loyalty necessarily that he owed Dallas before they did what they did. Like how much pressure do you think there will be for the Lakers to try to address at least one of the starter needs in a big way this summer?
I think the timeline is definitely interesting because first is the LeBron decision, then is the free agency, and everything. And then August 2nd, after all that, I think so. Basically, his decision comes last, so I think that gives him automatically the leverage. Though I don't think, like you said, I don't think he's the guy. Nothing that happened in his career doesn't look to me like LeBron, clutch, Rich Paul kind of, looking this strategically scheming, like this big picture, moving the pieces on the board. So I think he was saying in Dallas for a long time what kind of players he wanted to play with. And then after they did that in 2023 24 season, he said, finally, they got me the pieces that I wanted to play with. So I think he will say some things, but I don't think I don't see him as a guy who is like really, you will not see him in Shams tweets like Luka Doncic is really looking closely to this situation with LeBron James extension or free agency. I think he's a guy who, I don't know. I think there was one off season in Dallas before that when they didn't sign anybody, and he said, "Okay, I'm still, the free agency was basically over," and he said, "I'm still waiting to see what the front office will do," and everybody's saying it's over, man. So I think he's a guy who comes to play with a national team. He really switches focus to that. He takes off season as taking his mind off the NBA. So I think he will look closely. It's also now he's to be more serious. He is at the time of his career when he saw what kind of team he needs, and I think he's also smart enough to see that this Lakers roster is realistically a step or two steps back when he left on in terms of fit and complete talent in Dallas. So I think there will be pressure, but I don't think it will be direct pressure. It's more like a pressure that Dallas felt. There was never, Tim McMahon several times reported, there was internal pressure that the organization puts on themselves when you have a star like that to build around, because NBA environment is built and brings that pressure, but not necessarily coming from Luka per se.
Do you think he signs the extension?
Yeah, I think we were talking before we started recording. I think he has a similar situation now with the national team, when we are always talking about his loyalty. And I don't know, sometimes NBA fans don't like that he's playing for his national team every summer because it's very demanding.
Some Laker fans were not liking that.
Yeah. So, and to be honest, sometimes maybe there is a year to take a year off. Maybe this year it's a long summer. They finish the season earlier. So, but what I'm trying to say, a lot is talked about his loyalty. And also, I think he's the guy who likes familiarity, the camaraderie. So I think that's very similar now with the Lakers than the national team. I think he loves playing with LeBron. I think he's cherishing, like he did with Dirk last season. He played the first season when Dirk was basically the last season of his career. So I think he will sign. It will be interesting what kind of extension does he sign. Is it the 3 year? I think that's going to be 3 year because financially it's going to be makes the most sense. Yeah, but I think he will sign that extension.
Agreed. I think we're going to see at some point either directly on August 2nd or maybe they'll take a few days to just keep us waiting. It'll be 3 years, $165 million. Then he gets to opt out after he's played 10 years and then sign the 35% max and recoup some of the $100+ million that he lost by getting traded to the Lakers. But we'll see. Maybe he can make it up in endorsements or Lakers win a championship. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that is the calculation that is certainly on the back, if not of his mind, but certainly his agent's mind. So.
Yeah, I think so. But Iztok, thank you so much for your time. Other than digging basketball and subscribing to your Substack, I'm a subscriber. I'm an avid reader of it. I love it. Anything else you want to plug on here before we get out of here?
No, people can also find me on Twitter. So Iztok_Franko. And if anybody wants to talk basketball, I'm there.
Awesome, man. Well, I will be putting your Substack and your Twitter in the show notes, so check that out there if you want to follow him and subscribe to his stuff. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back tomorrow with a brand new mailbag. I will talk to you then.